interesting how that happened, but that's where I am.
Nice, nice. It's a nice place. I lived in Calgary for a few
Oh, okay,
months.
great. Okay. Wonderful. I don't have to explain exactly where we are.
Okay, awesome. We are live, guys. Okay, so I'm also going to record. I'll just get started now. Hello, everybody. I'm Sudha Jamte, and this is Weekly WED at Business School of AI. I get to meet a lot of my students here, past school student alums from Stanford or Barcelona Technology School or Business School of AI, all coming together. And now I hope my LinkedIn Learning students would also be able to join us. Usually Yashashwini hosts this. I'm filling in for her. So bear with me because I'm going to make sure that this is going to be more of a candid conversation instead of a prepared interview. And let me introduce Katrina Ingram. She's joining us from Alberta, Canada. And she was just telling us how it is not usually a place where you will expect to find a lot of AI Center of Excellence. But I'm very pleasantly surprised that the Calgary Police Force has an ethics board of citizens and residents. And it turns out that Katrina is one of those advisors. And so we've spoken about a lot of smart city and AI ethics and citizen participation. And we've had other speakers come and talk to us about setting ethics standards in a very collaborative way. We've spoken about building it. We've spoken about having these ethics boards in the companies and the like. So it's exciting for me. But today's topic is about robot ethics. I have been part of P0007, which is a IEEE standard for building fail-safe AI. And I've sat in that where I was thinking about autonomous vehicles because that's one of the topics I teach. And there were other people who were thinking about robots. They were talking about, different other kind of autonomous things. And so when I saw that there is a topic on robot ethics, I was thinking, is it possible for us to model that behavior so that the deep learning algorithm automatically becomes ethical? Or should we set standards? How is this going to work? And so let me pass it on to Katrina. And as we always do, we have a set of students here. Feel free. First of all, we are recording this. And I will share this on my newsletter on Sunday, the recording. And we are also streaming live on LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. So if you do not want to be heard, you can mute yourself. If you don't want to be on camera, then go off camera. You can still listen and otherwise, if you're comfortable, feel free to first of all introduce yourself, say where you're coming from, because I see a lot of students from various different classes and generations who are here, and this is we will be very helpful for you to even get to know each other and network. So introduce yourself, say where you're coming from. I'm Sudha Jamte. I'm here joining you from San Jose, from Silicon Valley. I'm a technology futurist, so you can say things like that about yourself in the chat. And then if you're comfortable, you can ask questions and keep it interactive because Katrina has magnanimously agreed an hour of her time to share her expertise. With that, I'm going to pass it on to Katrina. Do you want to introduce yourself and give us broadest background, because I think you're doing more than my intro, what I told you about.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much, Sudha, and thanks so much for inviting me here today. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. And I'll share with you my mental model for today's conversation is if you came to visit me and we were doing a behind the scenes tour of some things, that's what we're going to do today. So I pulled a few different things out that we can take a look at, and I'll do some screen sharing. But this is not a prepared presentation where I'm just talking at you for 45 minutes. I'm hoping that's not what this will be. Instead, because we have a small group, I'm hoping we can have some great dialogue and some questions. And one of the reasons I like dialogue so much, this kind of relates to my background, is I come from the world of radio. So I worked in media for many, many years, public broadcasting. Here in Canada, we have the CBC, sort of similar to your NPR stations in the US. And so I worked there for a while, and then I worked at a great little station called CKUA, so community radio. So anyways, I love conversation, I love dialogue, and it comes from that world of broadcasting. What I am going to do, I'm going to share a deck, and in that deck, I'll tell you about how did I go from community radio to working in this world of artificial intelligence and ethics. And then I'll use that as a bit of a jumping off point to talk about some of the courses that I've been developing. And then we can get into robo-ethics and really have some good discussion about that. So I will just share my screen here. Oh, actually, I need to get some permissions.
Yes,
I
let
think,
me
to do that.
do that. I made you co-host, so
Okay, fantastic. So let's just go and right, let me just rearrange a few things here. Sorry. Find the tab that I want. Mouse. All right, hopefully you can all see the PowerPoint presentation or
Yep.
the Google slide deck. Okay. All right, so I'm going to tell you a bit about me, and I'll tell you a bit about the micro-credential that I built, and that's kind of a bit of a segue into robo-ethics, which is actually the fourth course in this AI micro-credential that I have been building. So let me just start out with a bit about me. So I shared with you that I come from the world of community radio. And about 5 years ago, in 2017, I decided that I wanted to leave media, but I had no idea what I wanted to do. I was doing one of those mid-life career pivots that we sometimes do. And I found myself back at school doing a master's degree in communications and technology. And the University of Alberta has an outstanding artificial intelligence department. It's one of the leaders in Canada. I didn't know that when I got back to school, but I was kind of searching around for what is going to be that research topic that I'm going to really lean into. And I wandered into this lecture that was being given by an AI professor, and he was talking about all of these harms, things that were going wrong in the world of AI. He was very concerned. And I went up to him afterwards and I said, who's doing work in this area? And he told me not enough people. And that really launched my journey into the world of artificial intelligence and ethics. So I am not a technical person by trade. I'm not a data scientist. I'm not a computer scientist. I very much have a communications and business background. But in the course of doing my work, I've learned an awful lot about this topic, and in particular, thinking about some of the ways that we can bring ethics into the AI equation. So that's really how it got started for me. So I graduated in 2020, and in 2021, last year, I launched a company called Ethically Aligned AI. And what I do is I help organizations in order to think about ethics in terms of the technologies that they are building. So that's the work that I'm doing now. And as part of that journey last year, as I was kind of figuring out what is my company going to do exactly, I got a call from Athabasca University, which is a university based in Alberta that delivers a lot of online learning. In particular, micro-credentials are their thing. So they do a lot of these micro-credentials. And they said, would you like to partner to build an AI ethics micro-credential? I think there's a market for this. And I said, absolutely, I would be happy to do that. And that's really what launched my journey into the work that I've done in the past year, which is creating Canada's first AI ethics micro-credential. And robo-ethics is part of that. So let me tell you a bit about who this credential is for. It's for adult learners. It's for people who are working professionals. So these are people who want to learn about this topic of AI ethics, but maybe they don't want to commit to going back to school and doing a full degree. They need something short. They need something that they can fit into their life. So that's really the audience that we had envisioned. We also wanted to make this super accessible. We wanted to make sure that people who didn't have any other skill set in AI or weren't computer scientists, weren't technologists, could actually be able to access these courses. So we assumed no prior knowledge of AI or ethics. We really wanted to make it very, very accessible for people. And this is how it plays out. It's basically something that you can go and register for online. It's totally asynchronous. You can start and stop at whatever point in time. If you decide to take all 4 of these, there is a credential that's attached to the courses, or you can take 1 course, or you can take 2 courses. It's very modular. I kind of like thinking of it like stackable Lego blocks. You can take the intro, or you can just take the course on data. And we're just about to launch the course on roboethics, which is the final course in the series. So there's 4 courses altogether. So intro, data, machine learning models, and then roboethics.
Wow.
So I won't go into this part too much. Actually, I'm repurposing this deck from a talk that I did to other educators, and they wanted to know more about the nitty-gritty of what were the challenges that you encountered while you were making this. And there were a number of challenges and also I would say opportunities as well. So I won't go into this part too much. And I'm just going to scroll through these pictures fairly quickly just to show you what the course looks like. So it's beautifully illustrated. This is myself and my co-author, Dr. Tristan Getz. He's currently based out of Harvard in the embedded ethics program there. So we both co-authored the course. It's multimedia and multimodal. I'm not going to play all these videos just in terms of time, but there's a lot of things like flip cards and interactivity.
Katrina, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
I don't mind seeing, showing a little bit of the course, but I want to take a step back, set some context, because we have people who are not here who won't be able to ask the questions, right?
Oh, okay, sure.
So it would just look like marketing for your course. And I want to market for your course because I think it's a very unique course, but I want to make sure that we talk about what is robot ethics, because there are people out there who work on AI ethics, and there are people who work on devices and standards for that.
Yeah.
And they might wonder, do we need something called robot ethics as a separate topic? So can you help us understand that topic? And then I want to come back, and if it is allowed from your university, to show a little bit of the course, like a video clip or one of the lessons, a short, like a minute.
You bet. Yeah. And I'm sorry, I don't mean it to look like a marketing. I was trying to quickly pull some visuals together that I had on hand for this talk. And the reason
that's beautiful. That's beautiful because we don't have enough of these. I mean, I teach a lot of courses as part of universities, and then at Business School of AI, we have some courses that are, teaching AI in various dimensions. I typically teach for the no-code, non-coding users. And we have Susanna Raj, who comes and teaches AI ethics, but something that's affiliated with the university that's going to give credit in a very systematic way. People can learn. I didn't know that you had this going. So this is beautiful.
Yeah,
so
yeah, absolutely.
I'm just going to share this also in other, other places like my newsletter and the stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So part of the reason I want to show you this is to contextualize where roboethics fits in, and also talk about why did we feel roboethics was a specific course by itself. I want to show you one more thing before I leave this deck. And this is important to me because I'm just going to quickly scroll to the end here. The part that's important to me is to say there's a lot of people that go behind the technology. And these are some of the fantastic people I got to work with to build this course. And I think it's important to acknowledge that, because I think sometimes when we talk about these systems, we abstract away all the labor that goes into them. And from an ethics perspective, it's really important, I think, to acknowledge how much labor goes into anything, whether that's labeling a data set or collecting the data in the first place, or doing all that work to process the data to get it to the point where we can build something out of it. All of that work a lot of times goes unacknowledged. So I didn't want to do that with my particular course. And I think it also starts to establish how we were able, when I show you the course itself, how we're able to build something that is so beautiful, because certainly I don't have the skill sets to do that. Okay, so now what I'm going to
tag these people, we can tag these people to give them credit and say thank you.
Absolutely.
Also, yeah.
So let me just stop sharing for a moment. Let me just talk for a bit about roboethics and how we set this up. So basically, because all of these courses are modular, and you can just take roboethics, for example. What we do in each course is we establish what is AI, what is ethics, what is AI ethics, and then we go into the topic in a deeper dive. And the reason that roboethics was important as a separate course, aside from just talking about AI in general, is that there's something that happens when we embody intelligence in a thing that can then move around a room, interact with us. There's something unique about that. And there's something that in some way gets us to form more of an attachment to that thing. We anthropomorphize it to a large degree. And there's a great story about a roboticist named Cynthia Breezel. So she was working out of her lab, and she was building robots, some kind of cute, fuzzy little things, little white fluffy creatures. And, you know, she kind of fell in love with these things. She knew what they were because she herself was a technologist. She understood that they weren't, you know, feeling things necessarily in the way that a human would, but she got really, really attached to these creations. And it's, you know, it shows that there's this whole emotional side of things that we have as humans because we relate to one another, we have relationships. And so when we build something that exhibits human-like qualities in some way and can interact with us physically in the real world, we form an attachment to it. And I think if you've ever watched a video of the Boston Dynamics dogs and you see them dancing and doing all kinds of things, you know, we think of them, first of all, we think of them as dogs, right? We were like, oh, those are Boston Dynamics dogs. And I know they're marketed that way as well. But there's something that kind of, you know, gets us to form an attachment. And so that's one of the reasons we wanted to separate that course out specifically. And what we do is we talk about AI in general in some of the other courses. We talk about data, we talk about models, et cetera. But in this course, we really focus on this idea of an embodied AI. So there's also different ways to think about,
Katrina,
I'll pause there, yeah.
So we had, I see some of my students here who had taken this data science course working with KiwiBot. So we have this thing called Live Lab, where we find a company who is working with AI, and then they become our customers essentially. So when you build AI, it's not done by one person or one team, but it's a diverse team of people. So the class has diverse set of students who come together, and then we have this external company who would be our partner. So we did one last semester with KiwiBot, and it's a delivery bot which delivers food, but they deliberately made it look cute. So their mission is they want to build the most socially acceptable robot in the world is the mission of the company. Now they've raised a lot of money, and then they're making many more Kiwis, which are driving around. It's very small. We've seen that. We went and visited them in San Jose, and they drive around, and the students interacted with different people within the company who are building it. So the data science team would think about Kiwi differently versus the engineering team would think about it differently, and the sales team would think about it differently. And we wanted to get an idea on what problem can we solve using AI for this company. And that was the thinking. But the one thing you said resonated with me about how we get attached to AI, and we especially devices, and anthropomorphize it. And I think there is a movement in companies like the Boston Robotics who deliberately, consciously are aware of it. Why do they have to build a dog and they're selling it to the police? And when it is sold to the police, it's not a friendly dog, it's not a puppy. But when they say, hey, now it can, walk better and run faster, and when they show that, we are not looking at it like a canine dog, we are thinking of it like a puppy at home. And so do you see that this whole concept of robot ethics is the first step is to train people to kind of desensitize on that, or to set rules to companies to do this ethically, so they're not kind of making it cute when it doesn't have to be cute?
Yeah. So these are fantastic points, and there's so much to unpack in what you've just said. So maybe I'll just set up, like, how do we think about, there's different ways to think about robo-ethics. You can take this term in a number of different ways, and there's 3 that we identified in the course, and there's one that we spend a little bit more time on, because as you can imagine, you have to focus and can't do everything. So the first is this idea of ethical robotics. So this is about making good design choices. It's about how we build these robots. It's about the IP. It's about all the things that go into the robot. The second way that we've identified to think about this is ethical robots. So different than ethical robotics, but ethical robots. And this is about programming robots to act ethically. So this is your classic autonomous car problem, trolley problem. What should the robot do? You can ask that kind of a question. And then the last thing that we've identified is the ethical treatment of robots. So this kind of lines up a little bit with how we treat other things like animals, for example. Like, why is it wrong to kick the Boston Dynamics robot? Not necessarily because it can feel anything, right? It's a robot, but there is an ethics around what it does to you as a person. So in this course, it is, when a micro-credential, which as I've established, you only have so much time and it's asynchronous and so forth. Most of our time is spent on this idea of ethical robotics. So how do we build these things in ways that are ethical, essentially? So it does draw on the other ideas of how are you training it, like what kind of training data has gone into this, what kind of models have you constructed for the robot? And then, even in terms of things like AI safety, kind of getting into that idea, because I think safety becomes even more important when you've got a thing, especially a big thing. Like some of these Boston Dynamics robots, they're not small. They could do some damage. How are they interacting with you? So the thing about robotics itself is that the field of robotics itself has actually been around for quite a long time. So we think about automation in a factory setting. That's been around for at least 100 years. You can go back to Henry Ford, and this is some of the things that we talk about in the courses of history, like where did this come from? We can go back to these kinds of factory robotic kind of rollouts. We can think about manufacturing. And if you've ever visited a manufacturing plant with robots, they're usually caged off, right? They're kept away from you as a person so that there's some safety. So what does it mean when we kind of bring our robots into like a home setting or into a work setting or into a social setting? We have to sort of think about these things differently. Maybe it's not just a giant mechanical arm anymore that's doing, screwing parts onto a door. It's something else. So these are some of the things that we cover in the course. But I just wanted to kind of lay out, there's different ways of thinking about this, and that's sort of how we've chosen to build the course. So I'm gonna pause there. I'm just gonna see if there is any feedback, questions, or anything so far on what we've covered.
Yeah, so for people who are here, I don't need to be asking all the questions. So if you have questions, you're welcome, because some of you have worked with KiwiBot. I see at least one person who works with robots, indoor robots, and then there are many students from the autonomous vehicle world. So if you have any questions, you're welcome. I think you can just ask. Otherwise, I will continue on.
Katrina, very nice explanation on the robotics. Yeah, this is Suresh. So I think the way you explained it is, the design of the robot needs to be ethical. The behavior of the robots needs to be ethical, and also the interaction of the robots needs to be ethical, correct?
Yeah.
Design, behavior, and interaction. And one more thing is, I think the impact of what robots are creating to the humans in terms of job changes and job losses needs to be also considered, I think, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And I'm happy to talk more about that, or if you have a specific question about that, we can get into that a little bit more.
No, I think you were talking about all the automation and things happening and how it impacts the workforce as well, right?
Yeah,
so I
absolutely.
think when the robot gets into the workforce, what is its impact and how it is impacting the human life is also one of the considerations for ethics, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And so, let me jump off that point, then I'll talk a bit more about automation and specifically the workforce, because this is the fear, isn't it? The fear that we're going to be automated away. And we've already seen this to a certain extent when it comes to physical labor. So if we think about like the Industrial Revolution, and we kind of go back to the turn of the 20th century, early 1900s, we start to see automation enter the factory. And the famous probably example that we all know of is Henry Ford. So automating the assembly line, making vehicles. And what did that do? We were able to now manufacture things a lot more cheaply. So there's kind of an economic imperative here. It broke work down into very discrete functions. We talk in the course about Taylorism, for example. And we can think of this as a bit of digital Taylorism that's happening now. But Taylor was known for these management experiments where he would time something, he'd figure out what is the discrete unit that needs to be done. And then what we've been able to do is turn that into an automated function. So we can think about the last 100 years as automating our labor, and that's had a lot of impact on people who work in factories, let's say. So a lot of factories have become robotic and automated. But now we're adding this other layer of intelligence into the equation. And this is, I think, an interesting question. So what happens when it's not just the physical piece of lifting, really heavy car parts, let's say, but it's also the intelligent piece of maybe being able to design things, all those things that we thought, well, humans can still do these things, right? Now we're kind of confronted with, I think, this situation of, oh, but as AI gets more sophisticated and gains more ground, what are the things that we're going to do? What are the things that are uniquely human? And kind of backing up to the biggest, philosophical question that I see is like, what does it even mean to be human when we start talking about relationships with robots or robots becoming part of us? So these are some of the things that, I've been thinking about and writing about and are covered in the course to some degree, not definitely in depth. But in terms of automation, I think we already have a track record of what some of this could look like. I think what we need to figure out is what are the things that we don't necessarily want to automate? What would those things look like? And I welcome questions here as well. I welcome thoughts on this because I'm not necessarily saying I have any of, all of this figured out. I've been spending time thinking about it. But these are the kinds of things I think we need to start to think about.
Does anybody else have a question? So, Katrina, you said something about, how you said there are 3 aspects about the design, behavior, and interaction. Can you talk to us a little bit about the behavior of robot? Because it is thought as technology that the robot is all built with AI, but there's a lot more design thinking that goes behind the scene on how the robot behaves. Mm-hmm. And how do you, when you're thinking of automating a robot, I think it's in the assembly line is a totally different thing. And if you're talking about the dog from Boston Robotics, which is going to be sold somewhere, right? But there are a lot of robots. I've seen cute robots that, typically startups build those because it looks like a viable technology. And then they will start out with one market and they might go sell it to the police. If they're not able to sell it to the police, they will say, okay, now we want to sell it to say homes to help seniors. And so it becomes a different product altogether. But when they're building it, when they're creating the behavior, that might not be a consideration. It might look like technology. So how do you manage? So should the behavior be policed later with an ethical board, or should it be built? Would you recommend that the ethics should be considered by the engineers building this?
Yeah, I think they have to be baked in from the beginning. And this is, going back to, thinking about AI ethics, even outside of robotics. I think there's some basic principles here that I think about. I think about how something is constructed, because these are things that are being constructed, all of these systems. And so whenever you're constructing something, you make a lot of design choices. You've already talked, Sudha, about design, school of design, and what kind of design choices do we make. And so instead of a flat interface like a screen, now we have this 3-dimensional kind of interface, right? With the ability to kind of interact with us in a real world setting. And what does that mean? To me, it means we have even more design choices that we need to sort out and we need to put in place so that we're not creating issues of safety. There was a story 2 weeks ago about a little boy who was playing chess with a robot and he got his finger broken. And what they were able to surmise afterwards is that the little boy, you know how kids are, they just kind of do things, they're unpredictable. And they probably didn't have a lot of training data for this robot to say, how are you going to interact with a 7-year-old? But this 7-year-old was a chess grandmaster and was, playing this game of chess with this robot. And he just reached in a little too fast and the robot grabbed his finger. And then the humans that were there kind of watching this, they couldn't pry the robot off the finger and the finger got broken. So just a small example, of something that is a safety issue. When I think about the design choices that probably went into that, I don't think those designers were thinking, oh, we're going to have a little 7-year-old get their fingers into this robot. I don't think that's what was going on. It probably never occurred to them. And yet that's the kind of thing that can happen in real life. And there's lots of those stories about real life scenarios that just never were considered in terms of the design. I can share with Boston Dynamics, because we did 2 interviews with different people who are using the Boston Dynamics robot for different applications. The first was a researcher, and she really wanted to understand how people react to this robot. So she was doing a lot of research on her campus, and she had to get clearance for things like data collection, for example, because this robot's going around and it's interacting with the environment. And did you give your permission that the robot could interact with you in that way? Probably not. You're just going to your class. And so these are kind of the considerations that she was thinking about. Conversely, I also talked to someone who had purchased one of these robots for use in an oil field setting here in Alberta. So this is an industrial setting. I'm in northern Canada. Sometimes it gets really, really cold here, like -30s cold. And we had this conversation about how would this robot interact in that setting? When there's snow and ice on the ground, would it be able to move, for example? Would that kind of extreme cold, what would it do for the electronics? If it got too close to something else that was electrical, how would that work? It would have to have some guardrails around that because you don't want arcing and sparking of your electrical devices and starting a fire, for example. So these are kind of all the considerations that we had to think through. Some of these things you might think, well, those are pretty mundane things, but they do kind of lead into these ethical choices around how you're even going to use the technology in what setting. So those are some of the things that we've talked about, or I've talked to people about, as we bring these technologies into our real world, our real life settings. And once we get into the home setting, I think there's even more questions around, now we do have children and we have pets and we have maybe someone who maybe doesn't walk as well and they have another, walking device or something like that they need to navigate with. How can the robot know all those scenarios and navigate well in all those scenarios? I think these are huge questions that we need to ask ourselves before we just kind of unleash these things into the world.
So I think Amazon has this new Astro robot that they are launching to move around. It's like a dog and it moves around inside your house. And the marketing is that it will walk around your house and understand who lives here, who's an intruder, and keep your house safe. And like you said, there will be pets and there will be other devices, and it's scary. Something you said resonated with me. This 7-year-old hand, got broken. Sounds so horrible, so horrible. And this was not even maliciously done, right? This robot just thought it was clearing chess pieces and would not let go because it was thinking it's an immobile piece. When it saw the finger, it's horrible. I remember there is a robot called Nightscope, which is like it's almost like up to our shoulder length, like maybe like 3 feet tall or 4 feet tall. It drives around. It's very famous now in Silicon Valley, and it's a security robot. It drives around the periphery of Google, Juniper networks. It's in a lot of malls, and it actually looks like a Daleks on the outside, And during Christmas time, they make one in red color and white color, and they want people to feel safe about it. But it is a security robot. And many years back, maybe 5 years back or so, when they first launched it in Stanford Mall, it almost ran over a kid's leg. And the mom came running and had to take the child away. It did hurt the child. And Nightscope made like a lot of announcements saying, no, we are children friendly and we will improve this, whatnot. And 3 years back, I saw it in the mall, and I go chase all kinds of moving things. And so I tried to go take a selfie with this robot. And just before me in the mall, I saw this little boy who went and poked the robot. And it was good because now it was not trained to be children friendly. So they said, you got to be good. When little people come and poke, you have to let it go. And then I go closer to it and it started screaming at me. And so I was just thinking they had originally failed to train it to be sensitive to little people. And now when I went closer, it said, hey, a human is not supposed to come closer. Maybe they're trying to steal it, would be the coding in there, right? And it started screaming because this is supposed to be a security robot. So I take that Nightscope as an example in my AIX design class and tell my students, if you were designing this robot as a design student, how would you design the interface? How will you design the ethics of this particular robot? I mean, this is nowhere near robot ethics that you're talking about, but more like a design exercise. And I'm always blown away by how each group of my students, we divvy them in groups and they do that. And each of my student group comes up with a different way of designing it with consideration of people, or the application they're thinking about is very, very humane compared to just building the device and then make it roam like a security guard type of thing. So I'm convinced that your course is much needed. We need to teach people right at the start for design and behavior. But the one thing that is not changing is what you said, that the robot was trained. Did we give permission that it is going to watch us and collect data on that? But that's how AI is done today. Do you see that changing? Because when it is a robot, it is physical, right? If it's just an AI and I'm doing autocorrect, or it is watching me with and looking for facial expression or something like that, it's still intrusive. They should be getting prior permission, but it is less physically harmful than this device that is going to roam around run over my legs or grab my finger or do something, right? Do you think it needs a different rule of training? Because eventually it'll get smarter. Maybe 4 years later, this robot which is breaking the finger will not, because it's learned in its training data, they would improve it. And we didn't give permission for the training data. So what is your recommendation?
As usual, so many great questions. I'm gonna, okay, let me back up and talk about the Amazon robot that's following you around the house. So let's just think about this for a moment. What if I put a complete stranger in your home with you, and they followed you around and they watched you all the time, and maybe they made notes, I don't know. Like, would that not be super weird? I think it would be incredibly weird and invasive, right? And yet here we are inviting these technologies to kind of do the same thing, right? But because they're not human or watching us in that way, maybe we're getting desensitized to this. I even think about Roomba, for example. There's been lots of articles written about how Roomba can map out like a room. How does it know like where to vacuum and so forth? It can kind of map out your space. But now you've got this other thing that it's even more invasive, kind of following you around. And it's sold or it's marketed a certain way. So I think that we need to also consider in the design of technologies, who is funding a technology? Why are they funding it? What do they want from it? So there's this whole economic side of the equation to consider as well. And I think it's interesting that a lot of it is marketed as, we're going to keep you safe and secure, right? Like a security robot in the mall, or this robot that's being marketed as a security for your home. Even things like the Ring doorbell, which aren't a robot, but are, have AI technologies and systems baked into them. It's all done in the name of security and safety and so forth. And it sets up this dynamic, I think, in our minds that the world is a really insecure and unsafe place, number one. We need all this security to keep us safe. Is that true? I don't know. Like, I think we should question these things a little bit more. And who is benefiting from that? Some company that's going to sell you, I don't know how much these things cost. I'm guessing a couple $1,000s. I don't know if anybody knows, but you know, it's not an inexpensive proposition, for example. So I think we need to start questioning the systems themselves of why does a technology even come into the world? And that's some of what, you know, I hope to do in some of my work is just question the overall system itself. So there's that piece of it. And then in terms of how we train the technologies, I think the challenge for us is it can be very difficult to think of every situation. And I think that one of the pieces of advice I have is try and have as diverse a team as possible and do lots of stakeholder research to try and get as many different kinds of opinions. So it's not just a particular kind of person who is thinking about these things and they live a certain kind of life and they don't have any of these other experiences. You want that diversity. But even in doing that, it can be very challenging because typically you do that work in the context of sub-organization that's trying to bring a technology to market. And they're going to do what's expedient for them as well. This is the business side, right? So they're going to basically make some business decisions about, okay, well, I think we've done enough research now, and I think it's time to like move into production or something like that. So I think we just need to be honest about all of that. And I think that it's going to take some time for us to do better. I don't necessarily think we're going to get it right all the time. And maybe it's these examples of getting it wrong that help us to get it more right the next time.
So Emmanuel has a question here. Emmanuel, do you want to speak up or do you want me to read it out?
So I can see the chat here. So
yes.
Unless you want to, if you want to talk about it, Emmanuel, that's fantastic. Or I can just read it as well. Do you believe that
there? It'll be better for the people who are out in the live stream who can see the chat.
Do you believe that there should be a robot ethics certification before being sold or used? I think it would be very helpful for consumers. So let's just think about average people, right? Like, I don't know, you go to the store and you buy an electronic appliance. And here in Canada, you know that the CSA has approved this. It's gone through all of their processes and it's safe. When you plug this thing in, it's not going to blow up on you. It's not going to cause a fire. I think we have to think back to the early days of electricity. That wasn't always the case. Like back in the early days, maybe you bought the toaster, you plug it in and it did cause a fire or something happens with this thing because appliances were new, electricity was new. There wasn't all these standards of how things should be used. And so getting to this point now where I think you just know that if something has made it into this particular channel, it's safe to use. I think getting to that point with robotics will be a necessary piece of creating enough consumer trust around bringing all of these things into our home. Because if we don't do that, and you know, children's fingers are getting broken, or robots are screaming at you in your kitchen, you're not going to put up with that very long before you say, you know what, I didn't pay to have this thing malfunction on me that way. And so I think in order to get to the point, if companies actually want robots to be part of our life in some way or part of our world, I think they're going to need to get to some kind of standardization and, you know, call it the safety label of some sort.
Yeah, I mean, I think in a way, like if you want to sell a consumer product, you gotta be UL certified or you have different standards that kind of guarantee that product somehow should meet those requirements. But now, as you get into privacy, security, you get into all different things and interaction with kind of human interaction, and making sure that there is at least somebody can check that box and say, yep, this is a ethical product versus not, or something like that. And I guess then the follow-up question would be, who do you believe that if there should be a certification of some sort, where that would come from? Is that from the government to the agencies to self-certification? I mean, I think everything is, from what I can see at the moment, is still a Wild West in terms of that aspect.
Yeah, it definitely. Yeah, you're right. It's definitely a Wild West. So I think a couple, I mean, there are groups working on this. Sudha mentioned IEEE. I think they're doing a lot in terms of setting global standards. When I was doing my research for the course, there was another group, the name escapes me right now, but it's basically a group that's focusing specifically on robotics and roboethics and wanting to issue something like a safety seal of approval. So they're doing some work specifically on that. I think every country is probably going to have their own government get involved in some way, just like they do with electronic appliances. So here in Canada, Canadian Standards Association, the equivalencies in America and in other countries, I think will also be involved in some of that standard setting. I think what probably doesn't work or what hasn't seemed to work is the industry sort of giving itself the seal of approval. I mean, that's sort of what we have right now. And I think there's a lot of room to let yourself off the hook, so to speak, and be a little bit easier on yourself. And also no consistency. Like if this group says this is safe and that group says this other thing is safe, but they're totally different, then like, how do we actually know at the end of the day? So I think that there is a lot of opportunity for credible groups to come in and kind of own that space. Another one that I think of is ISO, for example, could be another international body. But we need to get there, and it's on a lot of different dimensions as well. So there's sort of the physicality of the robot itself, but then there's all those other AI considerations that we talk about in AI ethics in general, whether it's data collection and how training data is used and how explainable is a model versus not, and so forth. All of those things I think also need to be considered. The robotic piece just adds another complication or another element to it.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. I'm just seeing, I was going to end with a short video. It's kind of a fun video, and if you're willing to, if you're willing to kind of end there, I don't know if we want to have more questions, or what would you like to see happen?
Are there any more questions here? Otherwise, we promised Catherine that we will wrap up by 10. I would like to see a little clip of your course also, because in the beginning when you were showing your course, I said, let's talk about this topic and come back.
Sure.
So if you can show a little bit of your course and people know where to go to find it, that will be very helpful. And then maybe we can wrap up with the video.
All right, let me just share this screen.
If you don't mind, people will be coming back to the LinkedIn where we are streaming and come back and ask questions. So if you could just keep a watch on that, maybe
sure.
you can answer some questions as they pop up.
All right. So, okay. So I'm hoping, can you see the pink background on screen? Yeah. Okay, great. Okay. So this is the course. I'm just going to scroll up here to one section of it.
So where do we go for the course?
Oh, okay. So the courses are found. I can throw a link in the chat in a minute, but the courses, this is actually just a sample because the course is not live yet. So you guys are getting the behind the scenes tour here. But if you do want to learn more about it, it's at PowerEd, Athabasca University, or you can also go to my website, ethicallyalignedai.com, and there's a little bit of a description about the micro-credential, and there's a link to the courses, so you can go there if you wish. But this is just a sample of one of the lessons in the course. So everything is asynchronous. It's got that really nice design flow to it. And so we have a lot of artwork, and I showed you the picture of all the different creators who are involved in helping to illustrate and design the course and make it look beautiful. And so this is, there's interactivity. These are the concepts I was talking about. So ethical robotics, ethical robot, ethical treatment of robots. So there's a lot of that. We have some third-party video, but we also have some of our own video in the course as well. And there's little quizzes that people can take. Again, it's meant to be very accessible for people who are not technical at all or don't know anything about this topic. We also have a lot of interviews with people. So this is the researcher I was talking about who has the Boston Dynamics dog. Her name's Stacey Dorr. And so I did a little interview with her, and we have some of it as text, but we also have these clips where you can listen directly to hear what Stacey has to say about a particular question. So that's a little bit of the course. And I'll just click over to this tab. We also have animations. So I've voiced a lot of these. I'll just play a tiny bit of this one for you.
Sometimes human beings assume that an artificial intelligence is smarter and more sophisticated than it actually is. Computer scientists call this phenomenon the ELIZA effect. This term comes from an early chatbot named Eliza. It was created in the 1960s by computer scientist Joseph Weizenbaum.
I'll stop it there, but you get the idea. We have a lot of history, and what I like to do is draw the past to the present and then kind of project that out into the future. And I'm just going to end, this isn't in the course, but this is something that I'm excited about. I do a lot of projects just to kind of like inform people about this work who maybe have never heard about it at all. And so this is just a 2-minute video that my company's developed. I'm just going to play this really quickly and I'll end there. I'll be happy
This
to
is the
answer
world that
questions
AI
after.
built. This is the robot that runs the world that AI built. This is the model that powers the robot that runs the world that AI built. This is the data that trained the model that powers the robot that runs the world that AI built. This is the corporation that gathered the data that trained the model that powers the robot that runs the world that AI built. This is the bank who funded the corporation that gathered the data that trained the model that powers the robot that runs the world that AI built. This is the employee that works for the bank that funded the corporation that gathered the data that trained the model that powered the robot that runs the world that AI built. This is the smartphone of the employee that works for the bank that funded the corporation that gathered the data that trained the model that powered the robot that runs the world that AI built. This is a child who mined the rare minerals that were used in the smartphone of the employee that works for the bank that funded the corporation that gathered the data that trained the model that powered the robot that runs the world that AI built. This is a charity that rescued the child who mined the minerals that were used in the smartphone of the employee that works for the bank that funded the corporation that gathered the data that trained the model that powered the robot that runs the world that AI built. This is the billionaire who supports the charity that rescued the child who mined the minerals that were used in the smartphone of the employee that works for the bank that funded the corporation that gathered the data that trained the model that powered the robot that runs the world that AI built. This is the AI that belongs to the billionaire who supports the charity that rescued the child who mined the minerals that were used in the smartphone of the employee that works for the bank that funded the corporation that gathered the data that trained the model that powered the robot that runs the world that we all built. Humans build AI. We build robots and models. We gather the data. We create the financial structures that fund how technologies are built. We can change things by making different choices.
Beautiful, beautiful.
And with that, I will end the presentation.
Thank you so much, Katrina. That was beautiful. I mean, it is one thing to say a lot of people are involved in doing this, but that was very beautifully done. And it gives a taste of how you think about it, how you communicate, how you teach. So I'm excited to see your course launch tomorrow, Robot Ethics. And once it is ready live, you can share the link and we can post it everywhere also. And, let more people, what you showed, right? All the different people involved in building the AI world coming together. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And I'm happy to, I just saw a note about sharing that link. It's currently an unlisted video. I haven't taken it live, but I'm happy to share it with you. So I can do that before we head out. So here it is.
And Friday, I do a live stream called Sudha Live. So I will show a little bit of your live class so that people can grab the URL and see this video too. And then we'll put it out in the newsletter that goes out on Sunday. So I'm excited for it. Thank you so much for finding the time and having this candid conversation. I know you have done such amazing work to produce and do the course with the amazing team, and to come and have this candid conversation with us was beautiful. So thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thanks for having me. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy your day. Bye.
So with that, I'm going to stop the live stream. Thank you, everybody, for stopping by and